Hi guys. So for our last project, I will brief you in class, but a few of the things that I just want to touch on that we've sort of talked about so far. One is setting up margins and columns, where they start, where they end. Um, that's all part of a grid system. So really, when we're talking about setting up columns, it really doesn't matter um, how many columns you set up. Um, that's all going to be part of the grid system that you're going to work with. So you can decide to use a simple one column grid, but a simple one column grid is typically what you would find in book design. So it's really meant for text to go be symmetrical on the page and work all the way down. So typically in design, if we're working on posters, you can really decide how many columns you want to work with. There is a design philosophy out there that where people will work with 12 columns all the way across the page, then break them up. Um, I find for students that becomes too complex. So even working with a 4 column grid is not bad, or a 3 column grid. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stick to those grids. So let's just touch on a few of the things that we've talked about so far. Um, the you know the columns are really there to help you. There's a safety net. So within the columns themselves, you can see in between there we have gutters. Gutters provide space between the columns. This helps the reader read all the way across the column and know when one stops and one begins, right? So it doesn't confuse them. Um, it makes it a much better reading experience. Now, the next thing we can look at is hang lines. Hang lines in design are guides that are set up to actually determine where information might start and stop. So if I have a set of headlines that I know are going to be repeated over and over and over, I can go to my layout and I can go create guides. And within that, I might decide that I might do 4 rows, um, 4 rows of hang lines. So you can see it starts. You can say start at the within the margins or start on the page. So the difference is that's the entire page. This one is within the columns. So all that really does is it just gives you some guides to run across the page. So in these areas, you might decide that up in this area here, you're going to save that for images, or you may decide that after each one of these, there's a headline or something like that. So when you start working with hang lines, another one of the things you can work on. So right now we're working with a 4 column grid, right? And there's, you can work 1 to 12. It's up to you. Probably not one actually, but right now we've got a 4 column grid. Sometimes when you have um, a lot of information with less sort of less huge amounts of text, you can work on something called a modular grid. So a modular grid really breaks up the entire page into smaller sections uh, of a much smaller grid with grids within the grid. So if I go to create guides, I can increase these. So I'll just go remove existing guides, and then you'll see as I click on these, now I've basically created 7 columns this way. And when I have 4 columns going this way, it really breaks it up into sections. Oops, sorry about that. Let's just do that again. So you go create guides, clear any existing guides. Then I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to try going 7. Then I'm going to go OK. So now you can see, and you can clear these guides at any time, but now you can sort of see that within this layout, I can decide that information could go across 2 columns, or it could go stay in 1 column and go down my the columns here. But the idea is that it's much more modular. So you can sort of determine if it's a sort of a poster design. You could say, oh well, all of my body copy is going to stay in this area here. And what it allows you to do is still sort of have perfect spacing. So if we just kind of let's just color that. So if I just take my, if I just darken that in, I might decide that this is, this area is where I'm going to have my body copy. I'm going to take this area up here, and I'm going to make that my text. And then you start working in a much more modular way. It works for things like posters. So in this case, it's not a bad way to go. Or you can just stick with a 3 or 4 column grid. Things that I will do before I actually start my project is I will actually sketch out my posters or my layout using a grid. So the same way that we talked about doing thumbnail sketches in image making, it's exactly the same in pure design. So before I start my project, I'll determine or I'll do a bunch of thumbnails. So you can sort of see here is an example of a design that sort of explores different columns, right? So in this first one up here, we're looking at 3 columns on each page, 6 across, right? Then 8 columns in this one, then 6 columns with a sort of common hang line here. So this is a great way to sort of determine what you're going to do with your text before you start. Then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll sketch it out like this, and then determine, okay, so in this one, I'm actually going to work on a 3 column grid. So after I've sketched it out, I'll probably scan it in, and a lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually just bring it in and I will set it on my pasteboard so I can sort of see what I'm working on. And then once I do that, I can set up my document so it actually works with my sketch. So if I go check on my margins and columns, I'm going to switch this to 3. I'm still going to leave some. I'm gonna maybe simplify it a little bit. So in this case, I'm gonna clear my guides. We'll remove these ones. I'm gonna do a couple rows just in case I want to segment some of the information out, meaning that now I've got sections above, in the middle, and below. And so if we look at that, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, so I've finished creating the grid structure and I'm ready to work with it. This used to be much harder, but in InDesign, it's really easy to change these from. It's kind of the process. So you work on your thumbnails, you set up your InDesign document, and then you start building it from there. In the beginning, I'm not really worried about refining anything. I just want to get everything in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my type. And when I first bring it in, I keep it really basic, right? So I'll just select it, and I pretty much know that if it's a poster, poster type can be a little bit bigger than other other typography because it's meant to really be seen from about 6 feet away, right? So most posters are on walls and that sort of thing. So you can go a little bit bigger, but depending on how much type it is, I'm still going to sort of start with a decent type size. So I'll just bring up my type. Just gonna change this obviously to something that I'm familiar with. You know, so I'm not gonna pick anything crazy, and you know, the chances are very good that I'm gonna end up changing it at some point. But you know, as we've mentioned before, it's not going to be something too expressive. It's not going to be something that's all uppercase like this typeface. It's not going to be something that's all italic. So it really you just want to sort of start with something fairly basic, right? So it's the other thing is you don't want to have body copy that is bold. It becomes too hard to read. So these are all sort of things that we've talked about a little bit in the past. Let's just pick something. So we'll just go with a kind of a classic old one. We'll make it regular. Actually, I don't love Bodoni to be honest. Anziano Pro. Let's go with Amelia. Normal. Now we're going to bring our type size down to 10. We're going to open up our leading. We're going to change that to 2 columns. And so basically, we know that we have body copy or we have some type for our posters. So I'm going to set that up. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm always going to stick within my margins and columns. You know, the grid is a safety net. Since the proportions or the columns, margins, and hanglines they relate mathematically, I have the freedom to change scale. I can run the text across the columns, move the elements around, as long as the grid is the sort of basic structure. So it's like a safety net for you. So the other things I'll start doing is then I'll come in and go, okay, well, we know that in this layout, I have a headline, so I'll build my headline in. So one of the things about setting it up and working really tight to your grid is I'll often do my the safest kind of layouts to start. So this is a great way to sort of start with a thumbnail, work on your grid, follow it when you first set up your layout, and then you can break out of it and refine it as you go. Now, as you're starting to set up your posters and you're getting things in place, as I mentioned to quite a few of you, what I'll typically do is I'll get one design that I like, and then the great thing about InDesign is you can just go into here and click duplicate spread. So what that does, it basically takes that page and gives you another one. You know, if you endlessly move elements around on one page, you lose the chance to go back and revisit those options. It's not like we're wasting paper or no trees are getting cut down. So add as many pages as you like. And then, you know, then work big, right? Make the image, make your imagery full bleed. You can scale your headlines up. You know, scale the headline to run over the entire page. The point is to work with big gestures, right? Scaling a piece of type 1 point larger or 1 point smaller really is not going to give you big changes. But once you've arrived at a great layout you like, you can go back in, do all the refinements you want. The grid will remain a sense of unity. It's there to protect you, help you. Remember that the solution should be dynamic, legible, and hopefully a little bit unexpected.